that forget America, white America is an irredeemably racist country.
There's a growing mountain of evidence that police departments now play an active role in forcibly removing black people from areas through the use of violence and intimidation.
Gentrification is basically class warfare, and that's the way it is in our community. It actually results in the death of people, and it results in the displacement of communities.
We were protesting the water turnoffs. This was a nonviolent, peaceful protest to show our displeasure. Water is a human right, and no one should ever be deprived of water. I just could not stand idly by. The police came and they arrested me. First they took me up to the bus, and I guess they decided they couldn't get me in the bus, and they took me over and put me in a van, and the van was very uncomfortable. There was not enough room for me to sit up straight in my chair. My head was bent over and it was touching up against the ceiling. They did not strap my wheelchair down. They put a plainclothes officer in the back of the van, and he used his foot to brace my chair. And every time I moved or rolled or bumped my head up against the top of the ceiling, he would use his foot to brace me. Fortunately, we did not get into any kind of an accident or anything, or what could have happened to me, or the gentleman that was, officer that was back there with me, he wasn't belted in either.
Whose water?
The elders' water.
Whose water?
The elders' water.
Whose water?
The elders' water.
I was actually thinking about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And I thought about Rosa Parks, and I thought about how they must have felt when they were being arrested for a cause that they believed in. That I didn't just stand idly by. I never thought about accessibility much before, when I was able-bodied. And now I have so much more empathy. But I just feel that everyone has a right to access. Just like everyone has a right to water. You can't live without water. And you certainly can't live a quality lifestyle without access. It kind of made me feel good in a way that I stood up for something. I go to a lot of buildings where I would expect for there to be accommodations. To my surprise, they often have not made things very accessible. We can't afford for it to get any worse. I can't imagine if there were more cuts that cause for less accessibility than what we have right now. There needs to be a change in the attitude and the decision making. There needs to be more of a focus on humanity. People have more compassion for animals. Sometimes I feel like some people would rather that we be invisible so they wouldn't have to look at us. We all have to die one day. And when we leave here, we cannot take any material things. What becomes more important is what did you do to be of service, to help somebody? There's a better way. And I think that if we become more compassionate, we'll find that better way. I think that better way will benefit all of us.
Heard from those outraged by this entire proceeding has been harsh, and in some cases, as we saw yesterday, even implying violent retaliation, which has left some Detroit residents rather upset. Roger Weber is live with that part of the story. Roger, it has stirred up quite a bit of emotion.
Well, it has, Devin, and perhaps 30 or 40 people disrupted that meeting yesterday, but according to the latest census, Detroit has over 700,000 people. No matter how they feel about having an emergency manager, I talked to them about one reckless comment. Detroiters are used to hearing inflammatory rhetoric at public meetings. But this outburst yesterday by Malik Shabazz pushed the limits in a city torn apart by one riot in the 40s and another in the 60s.
And before we let you take over our city, we will burn it down first.
Shabazz spoke after helping disrupt a crucial meeting of the State Financial Review team. Today, I showed the statement to Detroiters who cringed at the verbal excess.
We will burn it down first.
That's disgraceful.
We all need to just relax. Burning the city down would make it bad for everybody. So making a statement like that, I think, is just too negative for my taste.
I disagree wholeheartedly. That's the problem with Detroit. Too many fires. I'm an insurance agent, and that's part of the reason why rates are so high. And him saying stuff like that, I don't agree with it at all.
We're not going to get anything done with that type of energy. You know, that a more calm mind would find us a solution that we all can live with.
I tried twice today to reach Shabazz for a comment, but was not able to connect with him. One woman who criticized him today said she hopes that he was simply caught up in the heat of the moment. Reporting live in Detroit, I'm Roger Weber, the Local 4.
Blackstar Bank, you cannot hide.
Blackstar Bank, you cannot hide.
We know how often you have lied.
We know how often you have lied.
We are marching here to say.
We are marching here to say.
That Victim Barbara's not okay.
Victim Barbara's not okay.
I'm Barbara Campbell, and I've been here since 1998. In 2006, the property was converted to condominiums. At that time, I got a mortgage through Flagstar Bank. In 2008, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. I made a request for a modification based on hardship. When I made the modification application, I was told that I didn't have to make payment of the mortgage during the determination process. However, I was foreclosed on. I think it's a misrepresentation of what I was told. I was told one thing and they did something totally different, which now have me getting eviction notices and probable eviction. And I'm trying to avoid that in any way that I can. 1998, when I found this property and we moved in, 3 sons, my biological son and my 2 adopted sons. I adopted my 2 nephews at the age of 2. And I wanted them to have a place where they could call home and feel that they were a part of this. And because, you know, we were having some very hard times, and I wanted them to know that if they did what was right, they had the opportunity to have what's right, a home that they could come home to and be a part of. It's no longer a matter of law, it's a matter of justice. I intend to keep fighting with Detroit Eviction Defense and its members and friends until Flagstar understands and does the right thing by keeping me in my home. We have currently demonstrated at 3 different Flagstar branches and taken letters to 22 Flagstar branches. This process, while it has affected me greatly and my family, it has affected so many people in Detroit. And Flagstar has been noted as one of the banks that has really put this kind of situation on Detroit residents. And the government has cited them for it.
In 2014, Flagstar paid $37 million in penalties for denying loan modifications to qualified homeowners.
And you know, they continue to do the same thing as it relates to modifications. People are not just asking for modifications for the fun, but because of hardships. And as you walk down the street in the city of Detroit, you can see it over and over again. Just the total destruction of the city and its homes. I've been very fortunate to have so many people come to my assistance.
We know that the banks are greedy and we have to fight. Barbara, we're fighting for you.
Rosa and Raymond Parks Institute, Detroit Eviction Defense, and so many, many more, my family, my friends, and people that I don't even know have been here for me and trying to help me to retain my home and my property. And I am eternally grateful for all that everybody has done. But I want Flagstar to do something, and that is to not evict me from my home.
Our craft is banking. Solutions tailored for you by people who find joy in the work. Flagstar. What solutions can we craft for you?
Detroit's bankruptcy is usually discussed within the context that the city had no choice but to file. It was flat broke. Yet many Detroiters have a different perspective. Earlier, I spoke with one activist, Reverend David Alexander Bullock, who was born and raised in the city. I first asked him how Detroit has changed over the past 15 years.
Detroit, in the last 15 years, has gone through significant changes, in many ways mirroring what's going on in urban centers around the country, but in a more acute way because of Detroit's history. Of course, Detroit is still an 82% black city. Had Mayor Coleman Alexander Young, who was mayor for 20 years. First African-American mayor, came of age politically in the late 70s and changed the city. Created an environment for black business, created an environment for African-American multimillionaires to emerge. Fast forward, while Detroit is 82% African-American, most of that history, the social seeds, the musical culture, and the strong labor/African-American political movements are dying down or have subsided. And now you have a gentrified RoboCop reality in Detroit. We got Midtown and Downtown, which is the rich, affluent Detroit. And then you really have the rest of Detroit, which is low to middle income, undereducated, unemployment, high infant mortality, and a number of the kind of social issues that we see in urban communities. And so there's been a shift in the last 15 years. Detroit is becoming more affluent, whiter, and in many ways more divided as the city moves forward.
Talk about the management system that was set up in the wake of Detroit filing bankruptcy.
Well, in Detroit, technically having the right to vote, but the emergency manager, who is the chief lawyer taking the city through bankruptcy, has all the power. So the elected officials have no power. Elected mayor, no power. Elected city council, no power. Elected police commissioners, no power. No representative government, The emergency manager runs the entire city. He is executive, legislative, and judicial, appointed by the governor. So there is no real sense of voting for anybody that you can recall, voting for anybody that represents you. And so the emergency manager is basically a dictator. Takes the city of Detroit through bankruptcy, 6 classes of creditors. Of course, one of the main classes of creditors are those retirees, basically folks who worked for the city of Detroit, public employee folks represented by AFSCME, who, because of the bankruptcy and the emergency manager's work, lose all of their health care, lose their right to sue after the bankruptcy, and also take a huge cut in their pension. And so you got folks who are living on maybe $1,800, $1,500, $1,000 a month, now living on $400 a month with no health care, and they can't sue. They can't change the terms of the settlement. And that's one main class of creditors. And so you see that happening in Detroit. No democracy, no parity in terms of a shared sacrifice for helping the city emerge from bankruptcy. And then on top of that, you have a major change in work rules and the restructuring of government, so that as Detroit emerges from bankruptcy, the executive orders of the emergency manager trump the city charter. So that city charter was written, it was ratified and approved by citizens, but it's suspended technically because Kevin Orr's executive orders take precedent over the city charter. Now, why is that important? Well, one reason that's important is because we've seen in Ferguson that there's this call for citizen oversight and accountability for police officers. In the Detroit City Charter, you have elected police commissioners that are supposed to provide citizen oversight for law enforcement. In Detroit, you got 83% unsolved murders. You got a number of folks who've been killed by police officers, have not been brought to justice. But because the emergency manager took the power away from the police commissioners and gave the mayor the authority over the police department, the city charter in that case is suspended. And so all kinds of changes that would not be possible have happened in the last 2 years. And I haven't begun to even talk about the land transfers and all of the city assets. You know, for instance, land for a hockey stadium being transferred for $1. So you have a bankrupt city transferring prime real estate for $1. Mike Ilitch, who sells Little Caesars pizzas, sells hot and readies for $5. We joke that you actually pay more for a pizza than he paid for prime real estate for a hockey stadium. Then the state of Michigan changed the law so that money that's supposed to go to education now goes to the development of the hockey stadium. This is a contrived and manufactured crisis that allowed the unions to be busted, city government to be restructured, work rules to be done away with, health care obligations, right, for folks who worked for the city of Detroit and who were retirees to be completely wiped off the books and their pensions to be reduced.
How did Kevin Orr and Governor Snyder exacerbate the problem?
So Governor Rick Snyder is now the second term governor, state of Michigan, Republican, much like Scott Walker in Wisconsin, described as a moderate by some, self-proclaimed a nerd. He has a business background and so comes in with what some might describe as a pro-business agenda, not a career politician, so really coming from the business sector to politics. And initially folks thought that maybe that meant that Governor Rick Snyder would be someone you could work with. And it turned out now Michigan is a right-to-work state. That's Governor Rick Snyder's work. The earned income tax credit is gone. That's Governor Rick Snyder's work. You got drug testing tied to welfare recipients receiving their assistance. That's Governor Rick Snyder's work. Education in Michigan, specifically in urban areas like Detroit, has been destroyed. That's Governor Rick Snyder's work.
Reverend, do you think housing and water are human rights?
I think water and housing are human rights, but I think the language of human rights doesn't have any resonance in the city of Detroit. And so, yes, but that argument is not going to sway political and corporate actors to do the right thing, because unfortunately politics isn't about doing the right thing anymore. It's about using government to streamline a process for accumulating wealth, right? And so while Ford Field has a $50,000 water bill and they're not shut off, and while the city of Detroit itself has a golf course with a $500,000 water bill and it's not shut off. They will shut off residents who have a $65 water bill, and they will say somehow their delinquency is evidence of a character flaw. It's amazing to me how when wealthy people don't pay their bills, they don't have a character flaw, right? But when people who don't have enough to pay their bills don't pay their bills, somehow they're not only delinquent, but they're deficient.
Reverend, what keeps you fighting for the city of Detroit?
I'm a reverend and a man of faith. And so because I'm a man of faith, faith fuels you to be faithful. I fundamentally believe in an impulse that suggests if you work hard, good things come your way. If the cause is righteous and you're right, it will be all right. But we've got to roll up our sleeves and do the hard work. There is no divine benefactor that's going to come in and do it for us, but we can be empowered internally with a deep sense that we can win, or as Dr. Martin Luther King would say, we shall overcome. And so when I think about Dr. King, right, nobody has dogs and hoses in Detroit. We just have emergency managers that don't have the right to vote. But we can organize, we can protest, we can disrupt and distract, but we can also propose and push public policy. So I keep on keeping on because we stand on the shoulders of people who believed in America. We stand on the shoulders of people who believed in democracy, who believed that the country would evolve in a positive way, and it has, right? So many gains in the last 40 to 50 years. We've come so far, we have so far to go, but we cannot give up now. So, you know, we always say, you know, we fall down, but when you hit the ground, you realize that the ground is no place for a champion. So we get back up again.
But if there are laws on the books that prevent homeowners from buying back their homes, what can people do to fight back?
If laws are put in place that don't allow you to help people get back in their homes, we must organize to change the laws. If there are laws that are put in place that allow police officers to shoot young African-American men or choke them, and they cannot be charged because the threshold for a police officer being charged is so high legally that all they have to say is, I feel threatened, to change the law. If the order of the day is segregation, Dr. King, have to change the law. We need a Voting Rights Act. We need a public accommodations bill. That's federal level, but also local changes. And so we must begin on the progressive side to move beyond platitudes and protests. That is kind of the final frontier of the recovery of Detroit, the public policy frontier. And we've been losing. We've not been proposing, right? The think tanks haven't been working. They haven't been organized. But in that space, I see a huge opportunity to develop policy options that actually empower people so that government can be shifted and shaped to benefit citizens.
You just can't get a sense of the devastation that's been wreaked on parts of Detroit from just a couple photographs. So we wanted to ride with Reverend Bullock through the communities that he knows best. When did all this happen? I mean, when?
This is somewhere between, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. I guess what's striking about this is that the recovery is happening, but it's not happening over here.
Yeah.
Right? No, people live on this street,
Yeah.
And no real grocery store, no pharmacy, no city services.
How many neighborhoods would you say are, like, how much of Detroit is?
It's like this.
Yeah.
90,000 vacant homes or vacant lots. So I would say 60% of Detroit is like this.
What about the lights? Someone yesterday was telling me about how now they're privatizing.
Well, you haven't seen any street lights.
Yeah,
I don't
exactly.
know if you've noticed that.
Yeah.
The city of Detroit used to have 88,000 lights. They took out about half of them as a part of the plan of adjustment. So now they're 44,000. And they got this new plan where they put like one LED light per block or something. The city's dark.
Yeah.
The city's dark. The Packard plant was just bought by a billionaire from Peru for $400,000. As a matter of fact, let's go see the Packard plant. You might get lucky. Yeah.
It's unbelievable.
Try to see the sign. Revitalizing the Packard plant, right? Yeah. Wow. You see how it just stretches. This is like almost 400,000 square feet. But this is right, like we are maybe 5 minutes from downtown. So when you think recovery, right? We're not 20 minutes. I mean, we're not on the other side of the city.
Right.
We're 4 minutes from downtown. Now people talk about Chicago and New Orleans, but you know they closed 50 schools in Detroit. You know, you close a school, you destroy a neighborhood.
Such a perfectly good school too. Like infrastructure is there.
Nothing wrong with that school.
I mean, there's enough people around here. Why? I mean, they obviously need it.
Because the plan is to get them out. You got to get rid of the school, right?
Yep. Make it as undesirable as possible.
Yeah.
It's just unbelievable to see more properties that are blighted than not. And never.
Oh no, I mean.
You know, I mean it's.
Which is for me. When you talk about the Detroit comeback and the recovery and the bankruptcy and the, you know, it's like, I'm not sure about this recovery thing, you know. It's like mission accomplished. We fixed the city.
The banner down, just like the Iraq War.
Yeah, right, we fixed it.
Yeah, it's done.
Oh, okay.
Back to normal.
Right.
Homes that once sheltered Detroit families now sit empty. Some have been burned to the ground. This desolation is known as blight or urban decay. But of course, one man's crisis is another man's opportunity. And foreign investors from China to Peru have flocked to Detroit, often buying dozens or hundreds of lots at a time with plans to convert them into large residential and commercial buildings. But there's one group of people who are not buying Detroit's blighted homes, the families that used to inhabit them. Thankfully, one group is working to change that. It's called the Tricycle Collective, and while in Detroit, I sat down with founder Michelle Oberholzer. I first asked her how badly Detroit was hit by the foreclosure crisis compared to the rest of the country.
Well, the foreclosure crisis, as we typically think of it, has to do with mortgage foreclosures, bank foreclosures. And Detroit was hit as hard or harder than many other cities. But what we're seeing now is an entirely different breed of foreclosures where when properties fall behind in their property taxes, the city or the county will foreclose upon those houses. And many of those houses are bank-owned or are owned by their own occupants who may have paid a 20-year mortgage and finally become homeowners and are now facing foreclosure. So this is a case where the local government is actively taking steps to foreclose upon and likely displace the people who live in these houses.
And how many blighted homes are there?
The city identified 80,000 properties that are blighted properties in need of removal in last year's Blight Task Force, where this was a survey where all of Detroit was surveyed in a very kind of low-level street-side analysis. But it's known in Detroit that there's an 80% correlation between foreclosure and blight. So what we have now is, in this past year, 10,000 occupied homes going into foreclosure. 80% of those are likely going to become blighted. Next year, the auction will be up to 3 or 4 times as large. And so if 80% of those are then blighted, we are creating more blight faster than we can clean it up. And blight begets blight. You know, once a building is unoccupied, it itself deteriorates, and then the property values of neighboring homes go down, and the fiber of the community is hurt, and it is a cancer, truly.
Talk about the Tricycle Collective. How did the organization form?
The Tricycle Collective emerged this past fall, very recently really, during a period where I was working for an organization that was conducting street-side property surveys of the buildings going into tax foreclosure. And as you would expect, if there's a strange person standing on the sidewalk taking a photo of your home, people approached me and asked me questions as I was doing this work. And I was glad that they did, because it was an opportunity to have a conversation. And I was shocked and horrified and frustrated and saddened by how little they knew about their own situation. Most people did not know about the foreclosure, or at least the details of it. Many people had been lied to by their landlord when they saw the notice. Some people may not have gotten a notice. And almost in every case, people did not know about the auction and this incredible opportunity, really, to purchase their home back with a blank slate, no back taxes, and all they needed was the information and to be empowered to actually take advantage of it, and yet no one had bothered to tell them.
And how does the Tricycle Collective actually work? Talk about the process of the foreclosure and then the auctioning.
Through my own just anger and frustration, I started a fundraiser, an Indiegogo campaign, and then it was a matter of identifying those who would receive the funds. There were 10,000, as I said, 10,000 occupied homes in this year's auction, so way more than I had the capacity to help. And so I identified those homes that had a tricycle in the front yard, an indication that this was not just a home, but the home of a child, and therefore that this was a home that would be most beneficial to those who lived in it and to the community if we could preserve it. And so I partnered up with a local nonprofit called United Community Housing Coalition. They are a greatly overworked but wonderful organization that runs an auction support system. You need to have internet access to participate in the auction. You need to have $2,000 to participate, even though the starting bid is only $500, and you need that money up front right away. So these things make it so that a lot of people who could otherwise participate are not able to. So this organization facilitates that.
How successful has the program been?
We were able to help 10 families buy their homes back at auction, which is wonderful. And in 2 cases, we failed. The homeowners were outbid. And that was a tragedy and a great reminder of the many other similar tragedies that are taking place across the city for those people who didn't happen to be home when I was in their front yard, or who didn't happen to have a tricycle in the front yard, or whatever. So many more people being displaced and turned away and having great hardship imposed on them by this.
Michelle, do you think housing is a human right?
I do. I do, and I think that even from a standpoint other than a moral standpoint, just a clearly financial one, it actually makes sense for the city to house our people. There are Housing First programs which offer housing to homeless people without stipulation that they become clean, that they get a job, because it has been shown that having a stable living environment enables them to then do those other things. That the low-hanging fruit is having one's basic needs met. And we have so many homes in the city just dying to be cared for, and when we drive people out of them, we go out of our way in the name of money to drive them out. We are hurting them very much. We're also hurting ourselves. We're hurting the people who live nearby who are taxpayers. We're hurting the social support systems who will now have all these homeless people to deal with, and this infrastructure that was designed for more people that no longer needs to sustain. And it's just utterly missing the idea that these people have value. I see that. We have greatly lost sight of that in this city. There are new laws in the state of Michigan which say that if you are the previous owner of a house that went into foreclosure, you cannot buy it back.
And what recourse do the homeowners have now that that law is in effect?
There is the option of refusing to acknowledge the system that is in place. by not honoring the foreclosure, not recognizing the deed of the new owner, and by staying put instead of moving out. And that is a great risk, especially for people with families. And it's not the first choice. But in the absence of legitimate means, in the absence of reason, when we face the issue of, like I said, the fact that the taxes themselves are invalid, based on invalid values to begin with, that the interest rates are exorbitantly high, that due process isn't followed in notifying people of their taxes or of the foreclosure, all of these things that just, that make the end result of the foreclosure illegitimate and therefore not necessarily something that needs to be recognized.
Most people forget that Detroit is just 2 miles away from Windsor, Canada, on the other side of the river. As such, you would expect that the same standard of living would be relative, even though the sister cities are in different countries. But a few key stats tell a much different story. Take, for example, violent crime. While 2014 marked the lowest murder rate in Detroit in 47 years, there were still 300 homicides on record. Last year, Windsor saw 3. It's the same story when it comes to poverty. Detroit's rate stands at 38%, while Windsor's is 17%. And this is not to say that Canada doesn't have deep-rooted and complex problems just like the U.S. But this small comparison shows that when governments truly invest in things like public health care and infrastructure, these are the results. And when it comes to Detroit, investment in anything other than propping up skyscrapers and bailing out corporate America is out of the question. The government didn't have bat an eye when it bailed out auto giants like Chrysler and GM to the tune of $80 billion. But when people living in the Motor City needed help and retirees were on the brink of losing everything, suddenly there was no money to be found. The same cannot be said about the military-industrial complex, which is running an endless taxpayer-sponsored tab to the tune of $4.4 trillion and counting since 9/11. No, every time this country launches a new campaign in a new country against a new enemy, that money just magically appears. Not to mention the $104 billion in foreign aid projects, billions of which go to assisting other countries' militaries in rebuilding communities thousands of miles away that we've already destroyed many times over. At the end of the day, Detroit is a story of priorities. And if this country continues to prioritize guns over water, bombs over shelter, and bloodshed over life, then it won't just be Detroit that needs saving.
The problem with violence is that we have never been violent. We have been too nonviolent.
There's no such thing as a nonviolent revolution. The only kind of revolution that's nonviolent is the Negro Revolution. The only revolution based on loving your enemy is the Negro Revolution. That's no revolution. A revolution is loving. Revolution is hostile. Revolution knows no compromise. Revolution overturns and destroys everything that gets in its way. And you sitting around here like a knot on the wall saying I'm going to love these folks no matter how much they hate me.
You call us savages and beasts and mad dogs running the street burning and looting, but we're doing this not for the destruction of the world, but we're trying to prove one point. We want freedom and justice and equality. We want to be treated equal. The best thing to do is give us freedom or at this place will riot with blood.
Here in Detroit, a city of war.